In the high-stakes world of naval aviation, where split-second decisions mean the difference between life and death, one woman's journey from Academy reject to Top Gun pilot would shatter every assumption about what it takes to soar among the clouds. They said she was too slow, too careful, too methodical for the lightning-fast reflexes demanded in the cockpit of an A-18 Super Hornet. Her instructors rolled their eyes when she asked questions others thought were obvious. Fellow cadets snickered when she took extra time to complete pre-flight checks that others rushed through in minutes. But on one fateful morning above the Pacific Ocean, when enemy missiles screamed through the sky and her squadron faced their darkest hour, Lieutenant Sarah Chen would prove that sometimes the tortoise doesn't just beat the hare, sometimes she saves everyone's life while doing it. This is the true story of how the pilot they called Slow Motion became the fastest combat takeoff in naval aviation history, and why the very traits that made her different became the qualities that made her extraordinary. Sarah Chen had always dreamed of flying, but her path to the cockpit was anything but smooth. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, she spent countless hours watching military aircraft streak across the sky during air shows, her heart racing with each thunderous roar of jet engines. Her parents, both engineers, encouraged her scientific curiosity, but worried about their daughter's fascination with such a dangerous career. Sarah didn't care about the risks. She knew, from the age of 8, that she belonged in the sky. When she finally made it to the Naval Academy, Sarah quickly realized that wanting something and achieving it were two very different things. The Academy was a pressure cooker where only the strongest survived, and Sarah's methodical approach to everything made her stand out for all the wrong reasons. While other cadets could memorize flight manuals overnight, Sarah took weeks to absorb the same material, asking questions that her instructors found tedious and unnecessary. Her roommate, Jessica Martinez, was everything Sarah wasn't. Quick-witted, confident, and blessed with natural reflexes that seemed almost supernatural. Jessica could complete emergency procedures in half the time it took Sarah, and she never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of this fact. During their first year, Sarah watched helplessly as Jessica earned praise from instructors while she struggled to keep up with even basic requirements. The real problems started during flight training at Naval Air Station Pensacola. Sarah's first instructor, Commander Robert Hayes, was a decorated pilot with little patience for students who couldn't keep up with his rapid-fire teaching style. On her first day in the simulator, Sarah took nearly twice as long as the recommended time to complete her pre-flight checklist. Commander Hayes stood behind her, tapping his foot impatiently as she methodically worked through each item. "Chen, at this rate the enemy will have shot you down before you even start the engine," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The other students in the room snickered, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She tried to speed up, but her hand shook as she fumbled with the controls, making mistakes she never would have made if she had taken her time. The pattern continued for weeks. Every simulation, every training exercise, every evaluation seemed designed to highlight Sarah's perceived weaknesses. She was too slow to react to emergency scenarios. She asked too many questions during briefings. She double-checked systems that other students trusted without verification. Her fellow students began calling her Slow Motion, and the nickname stuck like glue. Sarah's confidence began to crumble. She started doubting every decision, second-guessing herself even more than before. During one particularly brutal training session, she froze completely when faced with a simulated engine failure. The silence in the simulator stretched for what felt like hours as Sarah's mind went blank, unable to remember the emergency procedures she had studied hundreds of times. "Chen, you just killed yourself and probably took out half the carrier deck with you," Commander Hayes announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe you should consider a different career path. The Navy needs good engineers too." That night, Sarah called her parents from her dorm room, tears streaming down her face. Her mother's gentle voice tried to comfort her, but Sarah could hear the worry in her tone. Her father, ever practical, suggested that maybe the military wasn't the right fit for her particular skills. The conversation left Sarah feeling more alone than ever. She seriously considered quitting. The application for transfer to a different program sat on her desk for 3 days, requiring only her signature to end her aviation dreams forever. But something inside her refused to give up. Every night, she stayed up late in the library, studying flight manuals and emergency procedures until she could recite them backwards. She spent hours in the simulator during her free time, practicing the same scenarios over and over until her movements became automatic. Her persistence began to pay off in unexpected ways. While other students rushed through pre-flight checks and missed critical details, Sarah's methodical approach caught problems that could have been catastrophic in real aircraft. During one training exercise, she discovered a hydraulic leak that the previous 3 students had completely overlooked. The discovery probably saved lives, but Commander Hayes dismissed it as luck rather than skill. Sarah's breakthrough moment came during a night training flight in a T-6 Texan trainer aircraft. The weather was marginal, with low clouds and gusty winds that made flying challenging even for experienced pilots. Sarah was paired with Lieutenant Commander Patricia Wong, a newer instructor who had heard about Sarah's struggles but hadn't formed any preconceptions about her abilities. As they prepared for takeoff, Sarah went through her usual methodical pre-flight routine. Lieutenant Commander Wong watched silently as Sarah checked and double-checked every system, noting how Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision, even though her pace was slower than most students. When they finally took off into the stormy night sky, Sarah's careful preparation paid dividends. The weather deteriorated rapidly, forcing them to navigate through turbulence that would have rattled experienced pilots. But Sarah remained calm and focused, her methodical training taking over. She communicated clearly with air traffic control, managed her aircraft systems efficiently, and never once panicked despite the challenging conditions. When other aircraft in the area declared emergencies and requested immediate landings, Sarah continued her training flight without incident. "Chen," Lieutenant Commander Wong said over the intercom as they approached the airport for landing, "that was some of the best flying I've seen from a student in years. You handled those conditions like a veteran pilot." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. For months she had been told she was too slow, too careful, too methodical for military aviation. But Lieutenant Commander Wong saw something different in Sarah's approach. She saw a pilot who prioritized safety and precision over flashy maneuvers and reckless speed. The landing in gusty crosswinds was perfect. Sarah's careful approach and steady hands brought the aircraft down smoothly despite conditions that had forced 2 other training flights to divert to alternate airports. As they taxied back to the flight line, Lieutenant Commander Wong made a note in Sarah's training record that would change everything. "Exceptional situational awareness and crisis management skills," she wrote. "Demonstrates maturity and judgment beyond her experience level. Recommend for advanced training track." Word of Sarah's performance that night spread quickly through the instructor ranks. Suddenly, some of the more experienced instructors began paying closer attention to Sarah's unique approach to flying. They noticed that while she might be slower than other students in routine operations, she excelled in situations that required careful thinking and precise execution. Commander Hayes remained skeptical, but even he couldn't ignore Sarah's improving performance. During a particularly complex navigation exercise, Sarah was the only student who successfully completed the entire route without any errors, despite radio failures and weather diversions that had confused more naturally gifted pilots. The real test came during carrier qualification training. Landing on an aircraft carrier is one of the most challenging skills in aviation, requiring split-second timing and absolute precision. The margin for error is virtually zero, and many promising pilots wash out during this phase of training. Sarah's methodical approach was about to face its ultimate challenge. As she prepared for her first carrier landing attempt, Sarah could feel the weight of months of criticism and doubt pressing down on her shoulders. Jessica Martinez had already successfully completed her carrier qualifications, landing her aircraft with the kind of confident swagger that made instructors beam with pride. Now it was Sarah's turn to prove that her careful, methodical approach could succeed where pure instinct and natural ability were supposedly required. The aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln stretched across the horizon like a floating city, its deck looking impossibly small from the cockpit of Sarah's T-45 training aircraft. The landing signal officer's voice crackled through her headset, providing guidance as she lined up for her approach. Sarah's hands were steady on the controls, her mind focused on the countless hours of practice that had brought her to this moment. Everything she had learned, every criticism she had endured, every doubt she had overcome would be tested in the next few minutes. The deck of the carrier rushed toward her, and Sarah knew that her future as a naval aviator hung in the balance. Success would vindicate her methodical approach and prove that there was more than one way to excel in the cockpit. Failure would confirm every criticism and likely end her dreams of flying for the Navy. As the carrier deck filled her windscreen and the landing signal officer's commands grew more urgent, Sarah drew upon every lesson she had learned during her difficult journey through flight training. She was about to discover that sometimes being different wasn't a weakness, sometimes it was exactly what the situation demanded. The moment Sarah's aircraft touched down on the carrier deck, she felt something click into place. The controlled crash of a carrier landing, where pilots literally fly their aircraft into the deck and catch an arresting wire to stop, was supposed to be terrifying for first-time students. Instead, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Her methodical preparation had paid off perfectly. Every system check, every approach parameter, every backup plan she had memorized came together in those crucial seconds. The landing signal officer's voice came through her headset with obvious surprise. Centering pass, good attitude, perfect touchdown. That's a great point landing, Jen. Sarah couldn't believe her ears. A grade point landing meant she had executed the most difficult maneuver in naval aviation flawlessly on her first attempt. Even Jessica Martinez had needed 3 tries to achieve the same result. As Sarah taxied clear of the landing area, she caught sight of Commander Hayes watching from the observation deck. His expression was unreadable, but she noticed he was taking notes more carefully than usual. Lieutenant Commander Wong, who had become something of a mentor to Sarah, gave her a thumbs up from her position near the aircraft handling crew. The next few days aboard the carrier were a revelation for Sarah. While other students struggled with the cramped quarters, constant noise, and general chaos of shipboard life, Sarah adapted quickly. Her methodical nature helped her organize her small living space efficiently, and her habit of thinking ahead meant she was always prepared for the next training evolution. More importantly, Sarah began to understand how her different approach to flying could be an asset rather than a liability. During a complex multi-aircraft formation exercise, Sarah's careful planning and attention to detail kept her flight of 4 aircraft perfectly coordinated, even when radio communications became garbled. While other flight leaders relied on quick reactions and gut instincts, Sarah had backup plans for her backup plans. Captain Elizabeth Morrison, the carrier's air wing commander, took notice of Sarah's performance during a particularly challenging night landing sequence. High winds and a pitching deck had forced several experienced pilots to request multiple landing attempts, but Sarah nailed her approach on the first try. After the exercise, Captain Morrison called Sarah to her office for a private meeting. "Chen, I've been watching your progress with interest," Captain Morrison said, gesturing for Sarah to sit down. "Your instructors have mixed opinions about your potential, but I see something different in your flying. You have a quality that can't be taught. The ability to stay calm under pressure and think clearly when everything goes wrong." Sarah felt a surge of hope. Captain Morrison was a legend in naval aviation, one of the first women to command a carrier air wing, and a pilot whose reputation for excellence was unquestioned. If she saw potential in Sarah's approach, maybe there was hope after all. "I'm recommending you for the A-18 Super Hornet training track," Captain Morrison continued. "It's an aggressive timeline, and you'll be competing against some of the best pilots in the Navy. But I think your methodical approach and crisis management skills make you an ideal candidate for multi-role fighter operations." Sarah left Captain Morrison's office walking on air. The FA-18 Super Hornet was the Navy's premier multi-role fighter, capable of air-to-air combat, ground attack missions, and electronic warfare operations. Only the top graduates from each training class were selected for Super Hornet training, and Sarah had never dared hope she might be among them. The news spread quickly through the training squadron, generating mixed reactions from her fellow students. Jessica Martinez congratulated Sarah with obvious confusion, clearly unable to understand how her slower roommate had earned such a prestigious assignment. Some of the other students openly questioned whether Sarah's selection was some kind of affirmative action decision rather than a merit-based choice. Commander Hayes was particularly vocal in his skepticism. During a squadron meeting, he made his feelings clear to anyone within earshot. "Flying fighters isn't about being careful and methodical," he announced. "It's about split-second reactions and aggressive tactics. Some pilots just aren't cut out for that kind of flying." Sarah tried not to let the criticism affect her, but doubt began creeping back into her mind. Maybe Captain Morrison had made a mistake. Maybe she really wasn't fighter pilot material. The transition to FA-18 training at Naval Air Station Lemoore in California would be the ultimate test of her abilities. Her first day at the FA-18 training squadron was intimidating beyond anything she had experienced. The other students were the cream of the crop from naval flight training, each one a top graduate with natural flying abilities that seemed almost superhuman. During introductions, Sarah listened as her classmates recounted their achievements, multiple awards, perfect training records, family legacies of military aviation excellence. When it was Sarah's turn to introduce herself, she simply stated her name and previous training base. She didn't mention the struggles, the criticism, or the nickname, Slow Motion, that had followed her through primary training. She just focused on the fact that she was here, against all odds, ready to learn how to fly the Navy's most advanced fighter aircraft. Her first instructor at Lemoore was Commander David Park, a former Top Gun instructor with over 2,000 hours in F/A-18s. Unlike Commander Hayes, Commander Park was known for his ability to bring out the best in students regardless of their background or initial skill level. He had a reputation for finding unconventional solutions to training challenges and for recognizing potential in unexpected places. Commander Park's first assessment of Sarah was thorough and fair. He put her through a series of simulator exercises designed to test her fundamental flying skills, tactical awareness, and ability to handle multiple tasks simultaneously. Sarah approached each challenge with a characteristic methodical style, taking time to analyze situations before acting. Interesting, Commander Park muttered as he watched Sarah work through a complex air-to-air engagement scenario. While other students might have immediately engaged the simulated enemy aircraft with aggressive maneuvers, Sarah took a more calculated approach. She used the aircraft's sophisticated radar systems to build a complete picture of the tactical situation before committing to any course of action. The result was devastatingly effective. Sarah's careful analysis allowed her to identify the optimal attack position and weapon selection for the engagement. Her methodical approach meant she never wasted ammunition or put herself in unnecessary danger. While more aggressive students might achieve quicker kills, they often did so at the cost of tactical positioning or fuel management that would have been problematic in real combat situations. Commander Park began to understand what Captain Morrison had seen in Sarah's flying. In the high-tech environment of modern fighter operations, the ability to process complex information quickly and accurately was often more important than raw flying instinct. Sarah's methodical nature made her exceptionally good at managing the A-18's sophisticated weapon systems and sensor networks. The first time Sarah flew an actual A-18 Super Hornet was a moment she would never forget. The aircraft was a marvel of engineering, with twin engines producing over 44,000 pounds of thrust and avionics systems that seemed like something out of a science fiction movie. As she settled into the cockpit for her first flight, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility for operating such an expensive and powerful machine. Her first takeoff in the Super Hornet was smooth and controlled, exactly what Commander Park expected from Sarah's careful approach to flying. But it was during the flight itself that Sarah began to understand why she had been selected for this training. The A-18's complex systems required constant management and monitoring, tasks that played directly to Sarah's strengths. While flying the aircraft, Sarah had to simultaneously monitor radar contacts, manage fuel consumption, communicate with air traffic control, and maintain formation with other aircraft. The multitasking demands were intense. But Sarah found herself thriving in the complex environment. Her methodical training had taught her to prioritize tasks effectively and never lose track of important details. During one training flight, Sarah and her classmates were presented with a simulated emergency scenario, designed to test their ability to handle multiple system failures simultaneously. The exercise involved engine problems, radar malfunctions, and communication failures all occurring within a few minutes of each other. Most students focused on the most immediate threat, the engine problems, and lost track of the other issues. Sarah took a different approach. She quickly assessed all three problems and determined that while the engine issue was serious, it wasn't immediately life-threatening. The communication failure, however, meant she couldn't coordinate with other aircraft in the area, creating a potential collision hazard. She prioritized restoring communications first, then worked through the other problems in order of their impact on flight safety. Commander Park was impressed by Sarah's performance during the exercise. Chen demonstrated excellent priority management and situational awareness, he noted in his training report. While other students focused on the obvious emergency, she correctly identified the most dangerous threat to the overall mission and addressed it first. Sarah's confidence began to grow as she progressed through the training program. She still faced skepticism from some instructors and classmates who couldn't understand her unconventional approach, but her results spoke for themselves. Her test scores were consistently high, her flying was safe and precise, and her understanding of combat tactics was becoming increasingly sophisticated. The real turning point came during a complex multi-aircraft exercise that simulated a real combat mission. Sarah was assigned as the mission commander for a 4-aircraft flight tasked with conducting a strike mission against a heavily defended target. The exercise included surface-to-air missiles, enemy fighters, and electronic jamming, all designed to test the students' ability to plan and execute a coordinated attack. Sarah spent hours planning the mission, considering every possible contingency and developing detailed backup plans. Her methodical approach frustrated some of her flight members, who were eager to get airborne and start the exercise. But Sarah insisted on thorough preparation, briefing every aspect of the mission until each pilot understood their role perfectly. When the exercise began, Sarah's careful planning paid off immediately. The flight encountered heavy enemy opposition exactly as she had anticipated. But her pre-planned responses allowed them to adapt quickly without losing formation or mission focus. While other flights struggled with communication breakdowns and tactical confusion, Sarah's methodical approach kept her team coordinated and effective. The mission was a complete success. Sarah's flight successfully struck their target while avoiding all enemy threats and bringing every aircraft home safely. The exercise controllers noted that Sarah's flight had achieved the best overall mission effectiveness score of any student flight in recent memory. After the debriefing, Commander Park pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "Chen, that was exceptional tactical leadership," he said with obvious admiration. "Your planning was thorough, your execution was flawless, and your crew coordination was outstanding. You've proven that there's more than one way to excel in this business." As Sarah prepared for the final phase of her A-18 training, she reflected on how far she had come. The student who had once been mocked for being too slow and methodical was now being praised for those same qualities. She was beginning to understand that her different approach to flying wasn't a weakness to be overcome, it was a strength to be leveraged. The final test would be her assignment to an operational squadron, where she would face real missions with real consequences. Sarah knew the challenges ahead would be even greater than anything she had faced in training, but she also knew she was ready. Her methodical nature, crisis management skills, and ability to think clearly under pressure were about to be tested in the unforgiving environment of actual naval operations. Sarah's assignment to VFA, 4-1 Black Aces aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, came with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The Black Aces were one of the Navy's most prestigious F/A-18 Super Hornet squadrons, with a combat history dating back to World War II and a reputation for excellence that was legendary throughout naval aviation. As Sarah reported for duty at Naval Air Station Lemoore before the squadron's upcoming deployment, she knew she would be joining some of the most experienced and skilled pilots in the Navy. The squadron's commanding officer, Commander Michael Thompson, was a no-nonsense leader with over 15 years of fighter pilot experience and multiple combat deployments. During Sarah's check-in meeting, he reviewed her training records with careful attention to detail. Sarah could see him pause at several entries, particularly the comments about her methodical approach and unconventional problem-solving methods. "Chen, you've got an interesting background," Commander Thompson said, looking up from her file. "Your training reports show some initial struggles but remarkable improvement over time. Captain Morrison spoke very highly of your potential, and Commander Park's final evaluation was exceptional. I'm curious to see how you'll fit in with our operational tempo." The Black Aces flew a demanding schedule that combined routine training flights with complex multi-squadron exercises designed to maintain combat readiness. Sarah quickly discovered that operational flying was significantly different from the structured training environment she had grown accustomed to. Missions were often planned with minimal preparation time, weather conditions were frequently challenging, and the pressure to perform was constant. Her squadron mates were initially welcoming but cautious. Lieutenant Commander Jason Razor Kelly, a veteran pilot with 3 combat deployments, was assigned as Sarah's mentor for her first few weeks with the squadron.
Razor had heard about Sarah's reputation from his contacts in the training command, and he was curious to see whether her methodical approach would translate to operational effectiveness.
"The thing about operational flying," Razor explained during Sarah's first squadron briefing, "is that you don't always have time for extensive planning and preparation.
Sometimes you get 15 minutes notice for a mission that you'd normally spend hours preparing for. The key is being able to adapt quickly while maintaining safety and mission effectiveness." Sarah's first few flights with the squadron were routine training sorties, designed to familiarize her with the unit's procedures and tactics. She flew as a wingman to more experienced pilots, focusing on learning the squadron's specific techniques for formation flying, air-to-air combat, and ground attack missions. Her methodical nature served her well during these initial flights, as she absorbed information quickly and rarely made the same mistake twice. The real test came during her first major exercise, a week-long multi-squadron training event called Red Flag, at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Red Flag was designed to simulate realistic combat conditions, with opposing forces using actual enemy tactics and sophisticated electronic warfare systems. For many pilots, Red Flag was their first taste of what actual combat might be like. Sarah was assigned to fly as part of a large strike package, tasked with attacking a heavily defended simulated enemy airbase. The mission planning was intense, involving dozens of aircraft from multiple services and requiring coordination between fighters, bombers, electronic warfare aircraft, and aerial refueling tankers. Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the complexity of the operation and the rapid pace of the planning process. During the mission brief, information flew by at breakneck speed. Target assignments, threat locations, communication procedures, and emergency protocols were covered in rapid succession, with little time for questions or clarification. Sarah tried to keep up, but she could feel herself falling behind as the briefers assumed knowledge and experience she didn't yet possess. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Ghost Williams, the mission commander for the strike package, noticed Sarah's confusion during the briefing. Ghost was one of the most respected pilots in naval aviation, with a reputation for bringing junior pilots along carefully while maintaining operational excellence. After the main briefing, she pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation.
"Chen, I can see you're feeling overwhelmed," Ghost said with understanding. "Red Flag is designed to be intense and confusing. The goal is to simulate the fog of war and force pilots to operate outside their comfort zones. Don't try to absorb everything at once. Focus on your specific role and trust your training." Ghost's advice helped, but Sarah still felt unprepared as she climbed into her A-18 for the mission launch. The strike package consisted of over 40 aircraft, and Sarah's role was to provide air-to-air protection for the bombers while they attacked their targets. It sounded simple in theory, but the reality of coordinating with so many aircraft while managing threats and maintaining formation was daunting. The mission began smoothly enough, with the entire strike package forming up over the Nevada desert and proceeding toward their target area. Sarah flew in a 4-aircraft division tasked with clearing enemy fighters from the bomber's approach route. Her division leader was Razor, who provided steady guidance over the radio as they approached the exercise area. Everything changed when they encountered the opposing force. Enemy fighters appeared on radar from multiple directions, forcing Sarah's division to split up and engage separate threats. Sarah found herself alone for the first time in a complex tactical situation, with multiple radar contacts and conflicting radio calls creating a chaotic information environment. Her instinct was to slow down and analyze the situation carefully, but the pace of events was too rapid for her usual methodical approach. Enemy fighters were closing rapidly, and Sarah had to make split-second decisions about which threats to engage and which weapons to use. For the first time since beginning FA-18 training, Sarah felt completely out of her depth. She made several tactical errors during the engagement, misidentifying friendly aircraft as threats and failing to maintain proper formation discipline. When the exercise ended and the debrief began, Sarah's performance was thoroughly critiqued by the exercise controllers. Her mistakes were highlighted in front of the entire strike package, and she could see the disappointment in Ghost's eyes as the errors were discussed. Chen demonstrated good basic flying skills but showed poor tactical decision-making under pressure, the exercise controller noted in his summary. Her situational awareness degraded rapidly when faced with multiple threats, and her communication was unclear during critical phases of the engagement. Sarah left the debrief feeling devastated. All the confidence she had built during training seemed to evaporate in the face of this harsh operational reality. Maybe her critics had been right all along. Maybe she really wasn't cut out for the fast-paced world of fighter operations. That evening, Razor found Sarah sitting alone in the squadron-ready room, staring at the mission materials from the day's exercise. She was going through the engagement step by step, trying to understand where she had gone wrong and how she could have performed better. Her methodical nature was asserting itself even in the face of disappointment. "Rough day," Razor observed, sitting down beside her. "But you know what? Every pilot goes through this. Red Flag is designed to humble people and show them what they don't know. The important thing is how you respond to the failure." Sarah looked up from her notes with obvious frustration. "I felt like I was back in primary training, making basic mistakes and falling behind everyone else. Maybe I'm just not fast enough for this kind of flying." Razor shook his head. "You're looking at this the wrong way. Your problem wasn't speed, it was information management. You were trying to process everything instead of prioritizing what was most important. That's actually a fixable problem." Over the next few days, Razor worked with Sarah to develop new techniques for managing information in high-stress tactical situations. Instead of trying to maintain awareness of everything happening around her, Sarah learned to focus on the most critical threats first and build her tactical picture gradually. Her methodical nature actually helped with this approach, as she was naturally good at organizing and prioritizing information. The breakthrough came during the final Red Flag mission of the week. Sarah was again assigned to provide air-to-air protection, but this time she implemented the new techniques Razor had taught her. Instead of being overwhelmed by the complexity of the tactical situation, she focused on building her understanding methodically, one piece at a time. When enemy fighters appeared on her radar, Sarah didn't panic or rush into engagement. Instead, she took a few precious seconds to analyze the tactical geometry and identify the most dangerous threats. Her careful analysis revealed that while there appeared to be multiple enemy aircraft, only 2 were in position to threaten the strike package.
The others were too far away to be immediate concerns. Sarah coordinated with her wingman to engage the two real threats while ignoring the distracting context that had confused her in previous missions. Her methodical approach allowed her to execute a textbook intercept, shooting down both enemy fighters before they could threaten the bombers. The engagement was so well executed that the exercise controllers used it as an example during the final debrief. Chen demonstrated excellent tactical prioritization in threat assessment. The controller noted. Her engagement was precise, efficient, and perfectly timed. This is exactly the kind of disciplined tactical thinking we want to see in operational scenarios. Ghost approached Sarah after the debrief with obvious approval. That was outstanding flying, Chen. You've learned how to use your analytical skills as a tactical advantage rather than letting them slow you down. That's the mark of a pilot who's ready for operational missions. The red flag experience was transformational for Sarah. She finally understood how to leverage her methodical nature in high-stress tactical situations. Instead of seeing her careful approach as a liability, she learned to use it as a tool for making better decisions under pressure. The key was knowing when to analyze and when to act, a skill that would prove invaluable in the months ahead. When the Black Aces deployed aboard the USS Ronald Reagan 6 months later, Sarah was a different pilot than the one who had struggled through her first red flag exercise. She had gained confidence in her ability to operate in complex tactical environments, and her squadron mates had come to respect her unique approach to problem-solving. The deployment would take them to the Western Pacific, where tensions with potential adversaries were higher than they had been in years. Sarah didn't know it yet, but her methodical approach and hard-won tactical skills were about to be tested in ways that no training exercise could fully prepare her for. The real world of naval aviation was waiting, and Sarah was finally ready to meet it head-on. As the Reagan sailed toward the Pacific, Sarah stood on the flight deck watching the California coastline disappear over the horizon. She thought about how far she had come from the struggling student who had been mocked for being too slow. Now she was an operational fighter pilot, qualified and ready to defend her country's interests wherever they might be threatened. The nickname Slow Motion had followed her to the fleet, but now it carried a different meaning. Her squadron mates used it with respect, recognizing that Sarah's deliberate approach often led to better outcomes than hasty decisions. She had learned that being different wasn't a weakness, it was simply another way of being effective. Sarah had no way of knowing that in just a few months, her methodical nature and crisis management skills would be put to the ultimate test. A crisis was brewing in the Pacific that would require every bit of skill, courage, and clear thinking she could muster. The pilot they had once called too slow for combat was about to prove that sometimes careful and methodical was exactly what the situation demanded. The USS Ronald Reagan had been operating in the South China Sea for 3 weeks when international tensions reached a boiling point. What had started as routine freedom of navigation operations quickly escalated into the most serious military crisis in the Pacific since the end of the Cold War. Sarah found herself at the center of events that would test every lesson she had learned during her difficult journey to operational readiness. The crisis began with a seemingly minor incident involving fishing vessels and territorial waters, but within hours it had spiraled into a standoff between major powers. Intelligence reports indicated that hostile forces were mobilizing advanced anti-ship missiles and fighter aircraft at bases throughout the region, creating a threat environment unlike anything the Reagan's crew had faced during peacetime operations. Admiral Patricia Richardson, the carrier strike group commander, called an emergency meeting of all squadron commanding officers to discuss the deteriorating situation. Sarah wasn't present at the high-level briefing, but the results filtered down through the chain of command quickly. Flight schedules were immediately revised to maintain continuous combat air patrols around the carrier, and all pilots were restricted to the ship pending further developments. Commander Thompson gathered the Black Aces in their ready room for a frank discussion of the situation. His normally calm demeanor showed signs of strain as he outlined the potential threats facing their strike group. Enemy submarines were believed to be operating in the area, and satellite imagery showed surface combatants moving toward the Reagan's operating area from multiple directions. The situation is fluid and potentially very dangerous, Commander Thompson explained to his assembled pilots. We're maintaining a high state of readiness, but we're also trying to avoid any actions that could be interpreted as provocative. Every mission from this point forward will be planned and executed with the understanding that we could face real combat at any moment. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to the briefing. All her training had been designed to prepare her for exactly this type of situation. But the reality of potential combat was sobering. The exercises and simulations had been challenging, but the knowledge that mistakes could result in real casualties added a weight to every decision that no training could fully replicate. The first indication that the crisis was escalating came at 030 hours, when the ship's general quarters alarm sounded throughout the Reagan. Sarah jolted awake in her stateroom and immediately began the practiced routine of getting into her flight gear as quickly as possible. The ship's announcement system crackled to life with urgent instructions for all aircrews to report to their ready rooms immediately. In the Black Ace's ready room, pilots gathered around the briefing screens as intelligence officers provided updates on the tactical situation. Long-range radar contacts had been detected approaching the carrier strike group from the north, and their flight profiles were consistent with hostile bomber aircraft. The Reagan's air wing was being scrambled to intercept the approaching threats and determine their intentions. Sarah was assigned to the second wave of interceptors, flying as wingman to Lieutenant Commander Kelly in a two-aircraft section tasked with providing backup to the primary intercept team. As she suited up for the flight, Sarah's hands were steadier than she had expected. The methodical pre-flight routine that had once been criticized for being too slow now felt like a source of strength and confidence. The catapult launch in the pre-dawn darkness was more intense than any Sarah had experienced. The Reagan's flight deck crew worked with practiced efficiency despite the urgent circumstances, and Sarah's A-18 was airborne within minutes of the scramble order. As she climbed away from the carrier's deck, she could see the lights of other aircraft already airborne and vectoring toward the incoming contacts. The intercept took place 200 miles north of the carrier, at an altitude of 30,000 feet above the dark Pacific Ocean. Sarah maintained formation with Razor as they approached the intercept point, listening to radio communications from the lead interceptors who had already made contact with the unknown aircraft. The tension in their voices was palpable as they reported that the contacts were indeed military bombers flying in a direct line toward the Reagan. Sarah's role was to remain in position as backup, while the lead aircraft attempted to establish communication with the approaching bombers and determine their intentions. Through her aircraft's sophisticated sensors, she could track the developing situation as it unfolded. The unknown aircraft showed no signs of changing course despite repeated radio calls from the Navy interceptors. The situation became critical when the approaching bombers suddenly accelerated and began descending toward attack altitude. Intelligence analysis had indicated that these particular aircraft were capable of carrying anti-ship cruise missiles with ranges exceeding 200 miles, meaning they were already within striking distance of the Reagan. The lead interceptor immediately reported the development and requested permission to take more aggressive action. Sarah listened to the radio traffic with growing tension as senior commanders debated how to respond to the escalating threat. Rules of engagement in this type of situation were complex, requiring clear, hostile intent before any weapons could be employed. The approaching bombers hadn't actually launched any missiles yet, but their flight profile was becoming increasingly threatening with each passing minute. The decision came from Admiral Richardson herself, transmitted through the carrier's command center to the intercepting aircraft. You are authorized to engage if the contacts demonstrate clear hostile intent. Use minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized that combat might be imminent. Everything she had trained for was about to become real, with consequences that extended far beyond exercise scores and training evaluations. The methodical preparation and careful analysis that had once been criticized now felt like exactly the right approach for such a serious situation. The lead interceptor began aggressive maneuvering to position himself between the hostile bombers and the carrier strike group, using his aircraft's radar to lock onto the lead bomber and demonstrate his ability to engage if necessary. Sarah maintained her backup position, ready to support if the situation deteriorated further. Suddenly, the tactical picture changed dramatically. Sarah's radar warning receiver began indicating that the bombers were illuminating her aircraft with targeting radars, a clear sign of hostile intent. At the same time, her electronic warfare systems detected the characteristic signatures of cruise missiles being powered up aboard the enemy aircraft. "Razor, they're lighting us up," Sarah reported over the radio, using the standard terminology for being targeted by enemy radars. "I'm seeing multiple missile preparation signatures from the lead contact." Razor's response was immediate and decisive. "Copy that. Lead, we're seeing hostile targeting activity. Recommend immediate engagement." What happened next unfolded in seconds but felt like hours to Sarah. The lead interceptor fired 2 air-to-air missiles at the primary bomber, just as Sarah detected the launch of multiple cruise missiles from the hostile aircraft. The enemy bombers had initiated an attack on the Reagan, and the Navy pilots were now fighting to prevent those missiles from reaching their target. Sarah found herself in the middle of her first real air-to-air combat engagement, with hostile missiles in the air and multiple aircraft maneuvering aggressively in a confined airspace. Her training took over as she positioned her aircraft to engage the second bomber, which was attempting to complete its missile launch while evading the American interceptors. The engagement was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in training. The enemy pilots were skilled and aggressive, using sophisticated electronic countermeasures and evasive maneuvers to complicate the American pilots' targeting solutions. Sarah had to process multiple threats simultaneously while maintaining formation with Razor and coordinating with the other aircraft in the area. Her methodical training proved invaluable in the chaotic environment of actual combat. While other pilots might have been overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation, Sarah's systematic approach allowed her to prioritize threats effectively and maintain situational awareness. She carefully analyzed the tactical geometry before committing to an attack, ensuring that her missile shot had the highest probability of success. Sarah's first combat missile launch was textbook perfect. She achieved a solid radar lock on the enemy bomber, confirmed that no friendly aircraft were in the line of fire, and fired a single AIM-120 missile at maximum effective range. The missile guided flawlessly to its target, destroying the bomber before it could complete its attack on the Reagan. The engagement lasted less than 10 minutes, but it resulted in the destruction of both hostile bombers and the interception of most of their cruise missiles by the Reagan's defensive systems. Sarah and her fellow pilots had successfully protected their carrier from a coordinated attack, preventing what could have been a catastrophic loss of life and equipment. As Sarah returned to the Reagan after the engagement, she felt a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and profound responsibility. She had just participated in the first naval air combat engagement in decades, and her performance had been crucial to the mission's success. The methodical approach that had once been criticized now felt like a tactical advantage that had helped save lives. The debrief following the engagement was intense and thorough. Every aspect of the intercept was analyzed in detail, from the initial detection of the hostile aircraft to the final destruction of their missiles. Sarah's performance was praised by the mission commanders, who noted her calm professionalism and effective tactical decision-making under extreme pressure. Chen demonstrated exceptional tactical discipline and situational awareness throughout the engagement. Admiral Richardson noted in her personal debrief with the participating pilots, her methodical approach to threat prioritization and weapon employment was exactly what the situation required. But the crisis was far from over. Intelligence reports indicated that the failed bomber attack was likely just the opening move in a larger conflict. Enemy surface forces were continuing to move toward the Reagan's operating area, and additional air threats were being detected at bases throughout the region. The carrier strike group was now effectively in a state of war, with Sarah and her squadron mates at the center of rapidly escalating hostilities. The next phase of the crisis would test every skill Sarah had developed during her journey from struggling flight student to operational fighter pilot. The methodical approach that had once made her different would soon prove to be exactly what the Navy needed in its most challenging hour. Sarah didn't know it yet, but her greatest test was still ahead, and it would require not just tactical skill, but also the kind of clear thinking under pressure that only came from years of careful, methodical preparation. As she prepared for what everyone knew would be an even more dangerous mission the following morning, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. The student who had once been too slow for combat was now a combat veteran, and her unique approach to flying was about to be tested in ways that no training could fully prepare her for. Dawn was still an hour away when the USS Ronald Reagan's Combat Information Center detected what everyone had been dreading, a massive coordinated attack approaching from multiple directions. Sarah was jolted awake by the urgent sound of the General Quarters alarm, followed immediately by the ship's announcement, system crackling with unprecedented urgency. All pilots man your aircraft immediately. This is not a drill. Launch the ready alert. Sarah had never heard that tone in the commanding officer's voice before. As she rushed toward the flight deck in the pre-dawn darkness, she could see the organized chaos of a carrier under imminent threat. Deck crews were running between aircraft, removing tie-down chains and conducting rapid pre-flight inspections by flashlight. The normal methodical pace of carrier operations had been replaced by an urgent ballet of men and women preparing for battle. In the brief time since the previous night's engagement, intelligence had painted an increasingly dire picture. Satellite imagery showed multiple enemy surface action groups converging on the Reagan's position, supported by land-based aircraft from several different directions. Most concerning were the submarine contacts that had been detected moving into blocking positions around the carrier strike group. The Reagan was effectively surrounded by hostile forces intent on destroying America's most powerful symbol of naval projection. Commander Thompson was waiting in the Black Aces ready room with an expression Sarah had never seen before. Controlled desperation mixed with absolute determination. The situation briefing was unlike anything from training exercises or even the previous night's engagement. This wasn't about intercepting a few bombers or dealing with isolated threats. This was about the survival of the entire carrier strike group against overwhelming odds. Ladies and gentlemen, we're facing the most serious threat any American carrier has encountered since World War II, Commander Thompson announced to his assembled pilots. Multiple surface action groups are closing from the north and west, supported by land-based aircraft from at least 3 different air bases. Submarine contacts are attempting to establish a blocking position to prevent our withdrawal. In short, we're in a fight for our lives. The battle plan was as desperate as it was audacious. The Reagan's air wing would launch everything capable of flying in a massive alpha strike, designed to break through the enemy's defensive screen and destroy their command and control capabilities. Sarah was assigned to lead a 4-aircraft division, tasked with suppressing enemy air defenses, while the main strike force attacked the surface ships threatening the carrier. As Sarah reviewed her mission briefing, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The timeline for the launch was impossibly aggressive. The entire air wing needed to be airborne in less than 30 minutes to have any chance of success. Normal carrier launch procedures required nearly an hour for a strike of this magnitude, but they didn't have that kind of time. Enemy missiles were already inbound toward the Reagan, and the carrier's defensive systems were engaging targets at maximum range. Sarah climbed into her F-18 knowing that this might be her final flight. The aircraft had been loaded with a full combat load of air-to-surface missiles and electronic warfare pods, making it heavier than she had ever flown before. As she settled into the cockpit and began her pre-flight checklist, Sarah forced herself to maintain the methodical approach that had brought her this far. Even with enemy missiles inbound, rushing through critical procedures could be fatal. But as she progressed through her checklist, Sarah began to notice problems. Several aircraft ahead of her in the launch sequence were experiencing mechanical difficulties that were delaying the entire operation. The catapult crews were working frantically to resolve the issues, but precious minutes were ticking away. According to the mission timeline, Sarah's aircraft should have been launching in 10 minutes, but she was still sitting on deck waiting for the aircraft ahead of her to clear their problems. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Radio reports from the carrier's command center painted an increasingly desperate picture. Enemy cruise missiles were approximately 20 minutes out from the Reagan, and the carrier's escorts were engaging multiple submarine contacts attempting to penetrate the defensive screen. If the air wing didn't launch immediately, they might not have a deck to return to. Sarah watched in frustration as the aircraft immediately ahead of her developed what appeared to be a serious avionics malfunction. The pilot and his crew chief were working frantically to resolve the problem, but it was clear that the aircraft wouldn't be ready to launch anytime soon. Standard procedure would be to tow the broken aircraft off the catapult and launch the next aircraft in sequence, but that process would take at least 5 more minutes that they didn't have. It was at that moment that Sarah made a decision that would define her naval career and ultimately save hundreds of lives. Instead of waiting for the normal launch sequence to resolve itself, she used her aircraft's radio to contact the air boss directly, an unprecedented break in normal protocol that could have resulted in severe disciplinary action under normal circumstances. "Air boss, this is Black Ace 205, Sarah transmitted, using her aircraft's call sign. "Request permission to taxi around the disabled aircraft and launch immediately. I have a good aircraft and full mission capability." The air boss's response came immediately, with obvious relief in his voice. "Black Ace 205, you are cleared to taxi around. Take Catapult 3 immediately. We need aircraft airborne now." What followed was the most challenging piece of aircraft handling Sarah had ever attempted. The Reagan's flight deck was crowded with aircraft, equipment, and personnel, leaving virtually no room for the complex taxi maneuvers required to reach the catapult. Sarah had to navigate her heavily loaded A-18 through a maze of obstacles while maintaining clearance from other aircraft and avoiding the dozens of deck personnel working frantically to prepare other aircraft for launch. Her methodical flight training proved invaluable during the taxi operation. While other pilots might have rushed and made dangerous mistakes, Sarah carefully calculated each turn and movement, ensuring that her aircraft's wingtips cleared obstacles with inches to spare. The deck crew guided her with precise hand signals as she maneuvered around parked aircraft, maintenance equipment, and other obstacles that would have been removed under normal circumstances. As Sarah approached the catapult, she could see that the entire launch operation was depending on her getting airborne quickly. The aircraft behind her were already beginning their taxi procedures, creating a domino effect that would determine whether the Reagan's air wing could launch in time to defend the carrier. Everything depended on Sarah's ability to execute a perfect catapult shot under maximum pressure. The catapult crew attached the launch bar to Sarah's aircraft with practiced efficiency, but she could see the urgency in their movements. Every second counted now, and the normal safety checks were being compressed into an absolute minimum time frame. Sarah ran through her final pre-launch checks with methodical precision, ensuring that her aircraft was ready for what would be one of the most critical launches in naval aviation history. As she advanced her throttles to full power and felt the A-18's twin engines spooling up to maximum thrust, Sarah experienced a moment of absolute clarity. All the criticism about being too slow, all the doubts about her suitability for fighter operations, all the struggles of flight training seemed irrelevant now. What mattered was executing this launch perfectly and getting airborne to defend her ship and her shipmates. The catapult fired with tremendous force, accelerating Sarah's heavily loaded aircraft from 0 to 150 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds. The sensation was more intense than any training launch because of the additional weight of her combat load, but Sarah's aircraft responded perfectly as it left the deck and climbed away from the Reagan. As she retracted her landing gear and began her climb toward the mission altitude, Sarah checked her watch and realized something extraordinary. From the moment she had first called the air boss requesting permission to taxi around the disabled aircraft to the moment her wheels left the Reagan's deck, only 19 seconds had elapsed. Sarah had just completed the fastest combat launch in the history of naval aviation, not through reckless speed, but through methodical preparation and precise execution under pressure. The significance of her achievement wouldn't be fully appreciated until after the mission was complete, but Sarah's rapid launch had a cascading effect on the entire air wing. Because she had gotten airborne so quickly, the aircraft behind her were able to launch ahead of schedule, allowing the entire strike force to get airborne minutes earlier than planned. Those precious minutes made the difference between success and potential catastrophe. Sarah's division successfully completed their air defense suppression mission, destroying multiple enemy radar sites and clearing the way for the main strike force to attack the surface ships threatening the Reagan. The coordinated attack was devastatingly effective, sinking 2 enemy cruisers and forcing the remaining hostile forces to withdraw. Most importantly, Sarah's rapid launch had given the air wing enough time to intercept and destroy the incoming cruise missiles before they could reach the carrier. The battle lasted 6 hours and resulted in a decisive American victory. But it was Sarah's 19-second launch that naval historians would later identify as the crucial turning point. Her methodical approach to aircraft handling, combined with clear thinking under extreme pressure, had enabled the Reagan's air wing to respond effectively to an overwhelming threat. When Sarah finally trapped aboard the Reagan after the mission, she was greeted by deck crews who had witnessed her extraordinary taxi and launch sequence. Word of her achievement had already spread throughout the ship, and sailors who had never spoken to her before approached with obvious admiration and respect. The pilot they had once called slow motion had just executed the fastest combat launch in naval history when it mattered most. Admiral Richardson personally debriefed Sarah after the mission, noting her exceptional performance in her permanent record. Lieutenant Chen's actions today likely saved this ship and everyone aboard her, the Admiral wrote. Her ability to think clearly and act decisively under extreme pressure exemplifies the best traditions of naval aviation. Commander Thompson's debrief was even more direct. Chen, what you did today was extraordinary. Your launch wasn't just fast, it was perfect. Every movement was calculated, every decision was correct, and your execution was flawless. You've proven that being methodical and being fast aren't mutually exclusive when you've prepared properly. The 19-second launch would become legendary within the Navy, studied by aviators and tacticians as an example of how proper training and clear thinking could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Sarah's methodical approach, once criticized as too slow for combat, had proven to be exactly what the situation required when every second counted. As the USS Ronald Reagan sailed away from the battle area towards safer waters, Sarah stood on the flight deck looking out over the Pacific Ocean. She thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment, from the struggling flight student who couldn't keep up with her classmates to the pilot who had just set a record for the fastest combat launch in naval aviation history. The nickname Slow Motion would follow Sarah for the rest of her career, but now it carried a different meaning entirely. Her fellow pilots used it with deep respect, understanding that Sarah's deliberate approach to flying had made her one of the most effective combat pilots in the Navy. She had proven that success in aviation wasn't just about natural talent or quick reflexes. It was about preparation, precision, and the ability to perform flawlessly when everything was on the line. Sarah's story became a turning point in how the Navy evaluated and trained pilots, leading to a greater appreciation for different approaches to flying and combat. Her career would continue to flourish, with multiple combat deployments and eventually command of her own squadron. But she would always remember the morning when she proved that being different wasn't a weakness. It was exactly the strength that the Navy needed in its darkest hour.